The champagne crystal shattered against the polished marble of the Vantage Hotel's penthouse suite, and 58 pairs of eyes snapped toward Bridget Mallory in the same instant. She was already on her knees. Her palm was sliced open, where a jagged shard caught her on the way down, blood seeping through the white cotton of her server's glove, and the Louis Roederer crystal she'd just knocked clean from Caspian Duro's hand was spreading in a pale gold pool around her, soaking through the knees of her uniform pants and reflecting the chandelier light like something almost beautiful. The music had stopped. The murmur of $200 million worth of Manhattan's most dangerous men had gone dead quiet. And then Sylvia Aldgate's voice sliced through the silence. She poisoned his glass. I watched her do it. Bridget Mallory was 26 years old, 5'4", and 282 pounds. She had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a nail salon in Woodside, Queens, with a mother who worked double shifts at a dry cleaner's and a younger brother whose asthma medication cost more per month than Bridget now made in a week. She had been serving at the Vantage for 3 years. Banquet events, private parties, charity galas, and in that time she had become fluent in a particular kind of invisibility. She knew how to move through a room full of wealth without disturbing it, how to refill a glass without making eye contact, how to absorb the small cruelties of women like Sylvia Aldgate without letting them land anywhere they could do damage. She was good at her job. She was exceptionally good at staying out of the way. Tonight was supposed to be the largest private event she'd ever worked. The Duro Summit, the hotel's internal booking code called it, though nobody on the staff spoke that name above a whisper. Caspian Duro controlled the northeastern corridor of organized crime from Providence to Philadelphia, and tonight he was hosting a private anniversary dinner. 5 years of consolidated operations, a celebration of his empire dressed up in black tie and crystal, and 5 courses of Wagyu beef. The hotel had deployed its best staff. Bridget had been specifically requested by the banquet manager after her performance at the Alderman Gala 3 months prior, which she'd taken as a compliment. She had not known at the time that the request had come from Sylvia Aldgate herself. Sylvia was 31, a size 2, and the kind of beautiful that looked engineered. Cheekbones you could cut glass on, hair the color of dark honey that sat in artful waves over bare shoulders draped in midnight blue Valentino. She was the only daughter of Thaddeus Aldgate, patriarch of the Aldgate family, and its legitimate front, one of the largest specialty flour import operations on the eastern seaboard, running out of a warehouse complex in Red Hook. The engagement between Sylvia and Caspian had been announced 8 months ago, a merger dressed up as a romance, the way these things always were, and nobody on either side of it seemed particularly confused about that fact. Nobody, perhaps, except Caspian himself. Bridget had noticed, the way she always noticed things quietly from the edges of rooms, that Caspian Duro looked at his fiancée the way a man looks at a contract he suspects has buried clauses, not with contempt, with a very specific kind of attention. She had first crossed Sylvia's path 90 minutes into the event while carrying a tray of canapés past the south end of the bar. Sylvia had stepped directly in front of her without looking, the way women who have never been inconvenienced learn to move through the world, and Bridget had caught the tray before it could tip. One single stuffed mushroom bounced off the edge and skidded across the marble. Sylvia had looked down at it, then up at Bridget. "God," she'd said, her voice pitched low and sweet, meant only for Bridget's ears. "They really will let anyone work an event now, won't they?" Her eyes moved over Bridget's uniform, her frame, her face with the practiced efficiency of a woman cataloguing a liability. "Try to stay out of the sight lines, sweetheart. We have photographers tonight." Bridget had said, "Of course, Miss Aldgate," and moved on. She was good at this. She had been absorbing this particular frequency of cruelty since the 7th grade, and had long since stopped letting it crack anything important. The toast was scheduled for 11:15. Bridget was assigned to the champagne service for the head table. A job she'd been given because her manager knew she was steady-handed and didn't spill. The crystal had been portioned into individual flutes earlier in the evening, staged on a silver tray in the service corridor at precise temperature for the final 30 minutes. Bridget had wheeled the cart out herself. She had loaded the tray herself. She knew exactly what she had touched and when. At 11:12, she was standing 3 feet from the head table, tray balanced on her left palm, when she leaned forward to set the first glass before Caspian Duro. That was when it hit her. Bridget Mallory had lived with severe multiple chemical sensitivities since she was 14 years old. 2 hospitalizations for anaphylaxis before she turned 16, once from hidden tree nuts in a bakery muffin, once from a cleaning product her school had switched to without notice. The experience had rewired something in her olfactory system in a way that no doctor had ever fully explained. She could smell things other people simply could not. She'd once identified a gas leak in a sealed kitchen 3 rooms away. She'd once stopped herself from eating a salad at a restaurant after detecting a trace of walnut oil in the dressing that nobody else at the table could register. She smelled something now. Not champagne, not the oak and citrus complexity of the crystal. Beneath it, threaded through it, almost dissolved, almost invisible, something sweet and synthetic and deeply wrong. A concentrated floral note that didn't belong, medicinal at the edges, like the inside of a greenhouse refrigeration unit, mixed with something organic and slightly rotten. She had encountered it once before, when she was 16, and had helped her mother's friend pack up an apartment, and they'd cleared out an entire closet full of commercial floral preservation solution. The kind of industrial compound that flower distributors use to extend the shelf life of bulk imports in cold storage. She knew that smell. She had left the apartment that day because it triggered a reaction. She knew with absolute certainty that it did not belong in a champagne flute. Caspian's hand was reaching for the glass. His fingers, broad, ringed on the right hand with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that slow movements make other people nervous, were a half-second from closing around the crystal stem. Bridget moved without deciding to. She didn't think about Sylvia. She didn't think about the photographers. She didn't stop to calculate what a woman who looked like her, in a server's uniform, knocking a glass out of a crime lord's hand, would look like to this room. Her elbow caught the base of the flute and it exploded sideways, catching the edge of the table and shattering across the white linen. Champagne spraying across Caspian's jacket sleeve and across the bare shoulder of the woman seated to his left. The sound was enormous in the sudden quiet. Caspian Duro went absolutely still. Felix Navarro, Caspian's head of security, 6'3", built like a load-bearing wall, was across the room in 3 seconds, his hand already inside his jacket. "What," Caspian said very quietly, "just happened?" And Sylvia Aldgate, who had been standing 6 feet away at the bar, turned. Something crossed her face, a single, unguarded flicker of expression that lasted less than a heartbeat before the performance replaced it. Not surprise, Bridget registered. Terror, raw and real and completely involuntary. Then it was gone, replaced by shock, then outrage, then the fluid, practiced distress of a woman who knew exactly how to perform a feeling in a room full of men who were watching. "She put something in his glass," Sylvia said. She stepped forward, her voice climbing into the register of controlled hysteria, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light as she lifted one hand to her chest. "I saw her. I saw her hand over the decanter in the corridor. I didn't say anything because I thought I'd imagined it, but she just knocked it before he could." Her voice broke with perfect, devastating precision. "Caspian, she was trying to kill you." The room erupted. Bridget heard it as sound, mostly. She was staring at the spilled champagne on the white linen, at the broken glass, at her own bleeding hand where she hadn't even registered the cut happening. Her tray was on the floor. Someone was shouting for security. Felix had her by the upper arm, his grip impersonal and absolutely immovable. "I didn't," she started. "Do not say another word," Felix said flatly. "Not meanly. Matter-of-factly, the way people speak when the outcome is already decided and words are just noise." "Caspian." Sylvia's voice modulated back toward controlled fury. "She has to be removed immediately. I will not stand here while the woman who just tried to murder my fiancé is breathing the same air as these guests." Caspian had not moved. He stood with one hand resting on the back of his chair, jacket, sleeve damp with crystal, and he was looking at Bridget with the same expression she had catalogued on him earlier in the evening. That particular contained attention, not rage. Something more careful than rage. "What's your name?" he said. "Bridget," she managed. "Bridget Mallory. Mr. Duro, the glass smelled wrong. I didn't put anything in it. The champagne had a chemical in it, something that didn't." "She's hysterical," Sylvia cut across her. "Look at her. She's fabricating stories to cover what she did." "She's bleeding," said a quiet voice from the far end of the table. Aldous Benning, the Commission's representative, 81 years old, who had attended more of these events than anyone in the room and who spoke almost never except when it mattered. He was looking at Bridget's hand. Caspian looked at it too. "Felix," he said, "take her to the east corridor. Don't let anyone near her." He turned towards Sylvia with the economy of motion that defined everything about him. "Keep the room comfortable. I'll be back in 10 minutes. "You can't seriously be." "Sylvia, absolute zero." Sylvia stopped. Felix walked Bridget out through the service entrance. Through the kitchen, the staff parted like water, and down a short hallway to a locked linen storage room on the east side of the floor. He opened it with a master key and stood back. "Sit down," he said. "Don't touch anything. Someone will come." The lock turned from the outside. She sat on a stack of folded tablecloths, pressed her bleeding hand against her thigh, and stared at the wall of clean white linen and understood, with the strange clarity of absolute terror, that she was almost certainly going to die in this hotel. Not in this room, eventually, once they decided what to do with her. She thought about her brother. She thought about the $12 tip she'd received last Tuesday from a man in a cheap suit who was clearly having the worst day of his life and had left it anyway. She thought about the smell. She went back to it the way she went back to everything sensory, methodically, pulling it apart like threads from a seam. The floral preservation compound, the synthetic sweetness underneath the champagne. She knew that smell. She knew exactly what it was and where it came from, and who used it, and why it had been suspended in that specific glass. The lock turned after 40 minutes. She stood up. It wasn't Felix. Caspian Duro stepped inside the storage room, closed the door behind him, and looked at her for a long moment in the fluorescent light. He had removed his jacket. His dress shirt was damp at the cuff, and she could see the edge of a tattoo at his wrist where the sleeve was rolled back. Dark geometric lines, old and deliberate. He was 41, with grey at his temples, and a face that looked like it had been composed under sustained pressure, every line earned through something specific. He held 2 items, a white hand towel and a small first aid kit from the front desk. "Give me your hand," he said. "Mr. Duro." "The hand, Bridget." She extended it. He crouched and examined the cut, a clean slice across the base of her palm. Not deep enough for stitches, but serious enough that it had soaked through her glove. He opened the kit, took out gauze, and began to clean it with more care than she'd expected from a man who ran organized crime on 2 coastlines. "Tell me about the smell," he said. She told him everything. The chemical sensitivities, the hospitalizations, what she could detect that other people couldn't. The specific compound she'd identified in the champagne, a commercial floriculture preservation solution used in industrial cold storage. How she recognized it. Why she was certain. Caspian said nothing while she talked. He bandaged her hand, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The champagne that spilled on the table," he said finally. "Felix kept the area clear. We swabbed the residue. I have a contact at Columbia's chemistry department on retainer." A pause. "He's not available until morning. But the dog." "What dog?" My Malinois was brought up at the start of the evening. A tradition at these events, don't ask. He was in the service corridor for about 20 minutes and got into the staging area. He licked up whatever spilled from the service cart when the glasses were loaded. Another pause, longer. "He collapsed 35 minutes ago. Cardiac symptoms. My vet is with him now." The room was very quiet. "I didn't load anything into those glasses," Bridget said. Her voice was completely steady, which surprised her. "I loaded the tray from the staged flutes. Whoever prepared the head table champagne prepared it before I ever touched it. The service corridor has cameras. Your security footage will show my hands the entire time." "I know," Caspian said. Then, Felix reviewed the footage 20 minutes ago. His voice had the quality of someone reading a document they had not wanted to open. "You are clean. Your hands were on the tray, and only the tray, from the corridor to the table. There are 4 minutes of earlier footage where the staging area for the head table is visible, and you are nowhere near it. Sylvia is." The name sat between them in the small room. "The floral compound," Bridget said carefully, "the kind I smelled in the champagne. It's commercial, industrial grade. The kind that flower distributors use for bulk preservation in refrigerated transit." She watched his face. "The Aldgate family runs a flower import operation." Caspian looked at her for a very long time. "Yes," he said, "they do." He stood. He was a tall man, not excessively, but enough that the room shifted when he straightened. He moved to the door and stopped with his hand on the latch, his back partially to her. Sylvia told her father this evening before the toast that she needed him to prepare for a change in management. He thought she meant the hotel staffing. Caspian's voice was almost meditative. "Richard Aldgate has been trying to absorb my northeastern operations for 3 years. I declined every approach. He sent his daughter to negotiate differently. A beat. She was not acting on his instruction. Richard is not stupid enough to arrange a hit at a commission event with Benning in the room, but she had access to the Aldgate supply chain, and a reason. She'd inherit, Bridget said, if you were dead and already married. 3 weeks from the ceremony. His jaw was a hard, precise line. She would have controlled the Duro estate as surviving spouse until my formal succession was resolved. With Aldgate muscle behind her, she may have calculated she could extend that indefinitely. He opened the door. "Stay close to me." "I'm a hotel server," she said. "This isn't." "You saved my life," he said. "And in exchange, the woman I was planning to marry told my security team you were an unstable employee who'd been fixating on me for months and finally acted on it." He looked back at her over his shoulder, and his eyes were the color of still, deep water. "Nothing like calm. You are not going back to that party as a server. You're coming with me as the person who handed me the truth. There is a considerable difference." The humidor room was behind the main suite, where Caspian conducted private conversations. It was where Sylvia Aldgate was sitting when he pushed the door open. She was not alone. Thaddeus Aldgate sat to her right, rigid, the bearing of a man who had been dangerous for a very long time and had simply learned to sit still about it. Conrad Aldgate, Sylvia's brother, stood near the window, his posture registering every alarm that Sylvia's face did not, and Aldous Benning in the corner armchair, who had requested his own presence here, and whose request Caspian had apparently not declined. Sylvia saw Bridget the same instant she saw Caspian, Something moved behind her eyes, the swift, recalibrating calculation of a person whose plan has developed an unexpected variable. "She should not be in this room," Sylvia said. "She's exactly where she should be," Caspian replied. He moved to the bar, poured 2 fingers of Macallan, set the glass down without drinking it. "My Malinois is in cardiac arrest. The champagne residue from the head table has been preserved. Columbia's lab opens at 8. By 10 tomorrow I'll have a full chemical analysis." He looked at Sylvia steadily. "But I already know what they'll find because Bridget told me what she smelled before I had the science to confirm it." "This woman," Sylvia said, her voice climbing, "is a hotel employee with a grudge and an active fantasy life. She has been reprimanded twice by hotel management for..." "For what?" Bridget heard herself speak. Her voice had stopped shaking entirely somewhere between the storage room and here. She stepped fully into the light of the humidor in her stained uniform with her bandaged hand, and she was aware that she was 282 pounds, standing in a room full of organized crime, and she did not care even slightly. "I've been reprimanded once in 3 years for arriving 4 minutes late during a subway delay, which Miss Aldgate would know because she reviewed my employment file before requesting me for this specific event." She looked at Sylvia directly. "You wanted me here because I was easy to discredit. I'm overweight. I'm a nobody from Queens. If something went wrong, you needed a target the room would believe without asking questions. Someone nobody would look at twice." The room was silent. "The compound in the champagne wasn't synthesized from scratch," Bridget continued. "It was sourced from a commercial floriculture supply line, the kind used in refrigerated bulk flower preservation. It has a distinct synthetic floral note under alkaline conditions which the champagne would have created. I recognized it because of my chemical sensitivities. I've encountered it in an Aldgate cold storage facility before." She paused. "It's not documented publicly. You wouldn't know it on smell unless you'd been inside one of those facilities or worked with the supply chain directly, which suggests whoever introduced it to the champagne had access to Aldgate resources and knew exactly what they were handling." Sylvia's face had gone the color of old marble. Thaddeus Aldgate turned to look at his daughter, not with horror, with the slow, assessing gaze of a man making a ledger entry. "Did you authorize this?" he said. Not a question, a completely different kind of question. "Papa." "Did you act on Aldgate resources?" Thaddeus said, his voice dropping to something that had no temperature at all. "Without consulting me, at a commission event, with Benning in attendance." He would never have agreed to the terms I needed. Sylvia's composure fractured, just at the edges, like old lacquer. The arrangement with Caspian wasn't giving us what we needed fast enough. I found a faster route. "You found a catastrophe," Thaddeus said. "I found. You exposed this family." His voice did not rise. It dropped, which was apparently much worse, given the way Conrad took one deliberate step sideways away from his sister. "You used our supply infrastructure for an unauthorized hit on a commission member at a commission-witnessed event, and you failed." He placed both hands flat on the table. "And you did it without telling me, which means you were planning to use outside muscle and our name to take his territory and position yourself to cut me out afterward. That's not." "Aldous." Thaddeus turned to Benning without looking at his daughter again. Aldous Benning opened his eyes and looked at the table and said, "The Commission's position on unauthorized hits at summit events is not ambiguous. The individual responsible is disavowed by the family of origin." Effective at this conversation, he folded his hands in his lap. The Aldgate Alliance proposal to the Duro family is obviously rescinded. Sylvia made a sound. It was not a word. Conrad stepped another foot to the left. Thaddeus Aldgate walked to the door without acknowledging that his daughter existed. Conrad followed. The door closed, and the room was very quiet, and Sylvia was alone in it except for Caspian and Benning and Bridget and 2 members of Felix's detail who had materialized from somewhere near the wall. What happened next was not something Bridget entirely watched. She turned away when Felix moved forward. She heard Sylvia's voice, sharp and cracking, saying Caspian's name in a register that was no longer calculated. She heard the door. She heard nothing after that. Aldous Benning stood slowly, using the arm of the chair. He looked at Bridget once, a long, evaluating look that seemed to be taking an actual measurement of something. Then he nodded at Caspian once. The way very old men acknowledge things they already knew were coming, and he left. The room was empty. Caspian stood with his back to the far wall, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. She had the distinct sense that he was doing something private with his face, that he would rather she not witness, and she looked away. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for the evening, for the loss of whatever he was losing quietly in this room. He looked up. "Don't be," he said, and then after a moment, "She picked you because you were easy to blame." "Yes." "She told me." He stopped, started again, more carefully. "She said you'd been requesting assignments to events I attended, that I should have security speak to you." He met Bridget's eyes. "I didn't, because it seemed like exactly the kind of story that gets taller every time it's told." "It wasn't true." "I know." A pause. "Felix checked your scheduling history tonight after pulling the footage. The reassignment to my events was requested by Sylvia's assistant, not by you. Months ago, she was constructing the story ahead of time." Bridget absorbed this. She was building the scapegoat before she needed one. Very methodically. Something moved in his expression, and it wasn't grief exactly, but something adjacent to it, the particular exhaustion of discovering that a threat was closer and more intimate than you'd calculated. And you were very convenient, the kind of person this room would accept as a villain without asking a single question. "Invisible," Bridget said. "I understand exactly how this world sees me. I've never been confused about it." He looked at her the way he had in the storage room. That still, specific attention, the kind she hadn't expected from a man like him and couldn't entirely account for. "My name is Caspian," he said quietly. "And you are not invisible. I need you to understand that as a fact, not a comfort." In the private sitting room of the cleared penthouse suite, 40 minutes later, she sat with her coat on and her bag over her shoulder because she had fully intended, and still intended, to go home. Caspian came in and sat across from her. "You have chemical sensitivities," he said. "You can identify compounds other people can't register. You notice things other people dismiss. You spent 3 years becoming invisible in rooms full of people who could have destroyed your career on a word, and you didn't flinch once." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What did you want to do before this?" She blinked. "What?" "Before the vantage, before the uniform, what were you trying to become?" It was such an unexpected question that she answered it honestly before she decided whether to. "Forensic chemistry. I got into CUNY's program. I couldn't afford the 2nd year." Something settled in his face. "I own 3 holding companies with active security consulting contracts. The 4th is a legitimate risk management firm that works with law enforcement on chemical trace analysis." He said it evenly, the way he said most things. "It needs people who can do what you did tonight." "I'm a hotel server," she said. "You were," he said, past tense. She studied him. "You don't owe me a career. I wasn't looking for." "I know what you weren't looking for." He held her gaze. "You weren't calculating anything. You smelled something wrong in a glass and you acted on it without stopping to measure the cost to yourself because you're the kind of person who does that regardless of the math." A pause. "I have a great many people around me who are very skilled at the math. I have almost no one who does the other thing." The suite was very quiet, Outside, the city made its perpetual sound, indifferent, enormous, continuing as cities do. Bridget looked at her bandaged hand. She thought about the storage room. She thought about Sylvia's eyes the moment she'd walked into the humidor behind Caspian, that fast, microscopic flicker of genuine fear. The plan had been so clean, the scapegoat chosen so carefully. Someone nobody would listen to, someone nobody would look at twice, someone nobody in that room would bother to question. She thought about the smell of the champagne, the way she had known, in the half-second before conscious thought caught up, that something was completely wrong. "I want to finish my degree," she said. "That's a reasonable place to start," Caspian said. He was watching her with that expression again. Not the calculation she had catalogued on his face all evening, but something underneath it. Something that had been surfacing since the storage room. Since he'd asked her why she'd moved without deciding to, and she had told him the truth without softening it. "You are not invisible," he said. "I want you to know I mean that as a statement of fact." Weeks later, in a version of the world she could not have predicted, while sitting on folded tablecloths in a linen closet, she would understand that the night had rearranged something fundamental. Not just her circumstances, not just the CUNY registration form sitting on her kitchen table, or the standing Tuesday evening dinner that had begun as a briefing and become something she didn't yet have precise language for. It had rearranged the way she understood her own weight in a room. Not her body's weight. She had always inhabited her body with more fluency than the world gave her credit for. But the weight of her attention, her perception, the specific, unreplicable fact of what she could detect that other people couldn't, the thing that had been a liability her entire life and had turned out, on one specific November night in Manhattan, to be the most critical thing in the room. Caspian sent her a photograph eventually of his Malinois, 3 days after the emergency vet, sitting upright in his velvet bed with an expression of profound, dignified grievance. The message attached said only, "He has opinions about the experience." She laughed until her eyes watered, alone in her apartment in Woodside, and then she saved the photograph to her phone. She had been invisible for so long that she had almost forgotten the thing about being overlooked. The moment someone finally pays attention and realizes exactly what they missed is worth every single quiet, careful year of waiting for it.